Welcome, everyone, to the Made Alive podcast, where we engage in conversations about what it means to live out the Made Alive life as we live in communion with God and community with God's people and committed to the cause of the kingdom. My name's Haley Gregory, and we are launching a new hospitality series. Today, I'm talking all about hospitality and what it means as we seek to live and walk the way of Jesus together. And so I am so excited for this series to be joined by one of my good colleagues and friends, Gloria Kim. So I'm going to kick it over to her.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Gloria. I am on staff here. I have the privilege of overseeing the hospitality ministry. And I'm very excited to invite our one and only Pastor Nirup to be our guest of the day. I would love to kick us off with the question, what has made you value hospitality to be one of the core values in your personal life and in LifeGate?
Well, glad to be here. So I don't think that I really understood the theology of hospitality or even the strategy of hospitality until much later in the process. I just grew up overseas in a very hospitable culture and then a very hospitable family. So our, Indian, Asian culture is in general a very hospitable culture. Everything revolves around food. So we say in America, we live to eat, or in America we eat to live, but in India we live to eat. So when a doctor is like, you can't have that anymore, like I'll just die. I'm gonna keep eating it. I won't stop. So we grew up in a really hospitable culture, like general hospitality in my house. There was always someone over. Dinner was a big deal. Meals were a big deal. And when people come over, it wasn't this, come over for an hour and then leave. It was they came over and they stayed for, I think some of them moved in for a while. And then more radical hospitality where our home was opened up, poor, the orphan, the widows. Like I really saw my parents living this way. And so I didn't know any different. I just thought that's how every family is. That's how we all are, which was interesting because Hannah and I, our families are very different, very, very different. But one of the things we have in common is both of our families were incredibly hospitable. And so we just knew for our marriage, that would be a big value, that our home is a sacred space and our table is the most important room in the house. So we grew up with that. So then when we moved to Denver to start this church, it's like, well, how do you get people together? Especially in a city that's unchurched, de-churched, and people have spiritual conversations, but they're not necessarily looking to belong to a church. So we just threw dinners every Wednesday. Yeah. And it wasn't a bait and switch. It wasn't, come to dinner and then let me tell you about Jesus. It was just come to dinner and connect with people and grow. And so that's how the church really grew. That, when I saw that, I started to really think through what is the ministry and the strategy of Jesus. And I love what Robert Caro says. He says in the Gospel of Luke, you either see Jesus at a meal, going to a meal, or coming from a meal. So meals were the strategy of Jesus, where he just was so hospitable to people. And you look at the entire story of the gospel, and it is God entering the human story, which is a story of hospitality. And so there's something really unique about it. So that's how it started. It didn't start as a laid out strategy, think through it. This is how I grew up. And then we just started doing it and saw that it worked and said, oh, this is actually a way to build bridges. This is a way to connect people. This is a way to create stories. And so that's how it really started. And then we just embodied it and said, that's who we're going to be. And then lastly, I would say, I'm convinced that hospitality is the only spiritual practice that accomplishes the Great Commission and the Great Commandment at the same time. To love your neighbor as yourself and to go make disciples of all nations. Like love the Lord your God, love your neighbor, go make disciples. And it happens at the same time. And I've just seen it play out time and time again.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's really important for people, especially in our day and age, right, to understand that hospitality, especially in the American West, isn't necessarily just around food, but it's more around like the connection with other human beings, right? It's like, I think so often we think of it as hosting, and I think you do a really great job of breaking down the difference between like hosting and hospitality, and that like sees people and dignifies them. As we're like thinking about hospitality, how would you say, I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how does this reflect God's character? Like, what is it about hospitality that is revealing God to us?
Yeah, Rosario Butterfield in her book, The Gospel Comes the House Key, has this really beautiful place where she points out how leprosy in the New Testament was really the way in which the Bible is showing what happens when sin enters our lives. And it's twofold. On the one hand, leprosy is something that's happening on the outside, which is what sin is on the inside. Like, it's deforming the human body. It's deforming the human mind. It's taking what was once beautiful and now making it corrupted. And nothing can save you outside of the grace of Christ. But the thing about leprosy in the ancient Near East is, if you had leprosy, you were isolated. You couldn't go to the temple. You were rejected from community life. You were rejected from social life. And so you were isolated. And this is what sin does. Sin automatically isolates you from others. Now, you might have proximity, but you really don't have intimacy at all. Sin creates distance. So you could have we could be close, but we're actually quite distant. And this is what sin does. And so it's when you see what Jesus does, where he goes to the leper, he goes to the orphan, he goes to the widow, what was the number one critique of Jesus? The number one critique was he sits with sinners. He dines with sinners. Now, he doesn't affirm them. He doesn't celebrate them. He certainly doesn't participate in what they do, but he opens his life to sit with them and then draw them into the supernatural love, transforming love of Jesus. But this is what sin does. Sin keeps us at a distance. Hospitality closes that gap. It puts us together, not to solve each other's problems, but to hear each other's stories and be drawn into the love of Christ. And so this is the gospel played out in real life. God looks down at us in our isolation. And rather than say, hey, get it together, and then meet me back up here at the temple, or meet me back in heaven, God looks at our isolation, looks at our leprosy, and he enters into that loneliness. He enters into that brokenness, heals us of it, which another way to think about salvation is healing. It's not just being saved. It's we're saved from sin and death, but we're healed. We're healed from a life where our loves, as Augustine would say, are disordered. We have these disordered loves that now God is, over time, in the Spirit, in community, putting back together in true love to find our true humanity in Christ. So he enters the story and he does that. And then what does the psalmist say? Like, there's no Hebrew word for hospitality. The New Testament commandment is be hospitable multiple times, but there's no Old Testament commandment. But the concept is throughout the Old Testament to make a place for the sojourner, to invite your enemy in, to sit and dine with the poor, the widows, the orphan, to care for the lonely and the broken, which is why the psalmist says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Like, even the psalmist is recognizing that what God is doing is entering our story and setting us up at a table with him, where there's dignity and there's honor and there's value and there's healing and there's wholeness. And that's the entire gospel moving. So when we participate in hospitality, we are actually practically participating in the way in which God moves into humanity. Wow. And it means, just like the gospel, it requires sacrifice. It requires time. It requires thoughtfulness. It requires moving from entertaining to actually serving. Like, the New Testament idea of hospitality is not entertainment. Right. The New Testament idea of hospitality, John 13, is servanthood. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to wash the feet of others inside this home, to see the dignity of people restored. So the hospitality is the gospel played out. Like, and there's a whole framework I could work you through of how to live a hospitable life. But as you look through that framework, like, oh, this is actually the gospel being played out in real life.
I also love this concept of, like, God, the creation narrative of God literally created a space, an intentional space and a place and time for an outsider to exist. So he created this space for us to come be in communion with him in just the creation narrative. So I think that's just the heart of the Lord. Like, from the beginning, he always intended to create this intimacy that we can share and be in communion and in relationship with him. And all that intentionally that goes into creating space, preparing, setting food, setting the table, like, it just reflects from the beginning, chapter 1, like the gospel. I think it's beautiful. Well, the following question would be, in what ways does God's hospitality challenge the cultural idea of who deserves to be invited?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's human nature is to be drawn to people who are most like you. You know, C.S. Lewis talks about the basic of friendship is me too. Like, oh, or you too. Like, oh, wait, you like sports too, or your favorite color is green, or you're also from that same city. And so part of that is not necessarily wrong. It's just human. We're drawn to people who look like us, who talk like us, who think like us, who vote like us, who are from the same background as us. Left unchecked, that then can become prejudicial. It can become hostile. And usually, the thing about hospitality is, in order to truly be hospitable, you have to confront the fear inside of you. You've got to confront that there's people I don't like, there's people I don't understand, there's groups of people that I don't necessarily vibe with, and I have to be willing to confront those, because normally hostility comes from fear. It's a deep-rooted fear. So it's willing to confront that and then extend an invitation to others into your home. So it's the gospel work is not just in the let's sit and have a meal and let's share stories and I get to know you more and let's build a bridge. And now there's like, oh, now you and I have also, you have a you too, me too, we have that. But even before that, I'm asking God to confront things inside of me. Every one of us has something inside of us that we don't want to be around that type of person. And it might be a color, it might be a disability, it might be a sickness, it might be a gender, it might be a nationality, it might be an age. Be like, oh, like I'm totally okay with those people, but those people I'm not. And I have to allow the gospel to confront me on that. Wow. And then the way it confronts me is by extending the invitation. So the awareness is one piece. Oh, I'm aware that these type of people make me feel uncomfortable. And I'm not even sure why, but they make me feel uncomfortable. And I can sit in the awareness, but I'll never find healing until I actually make the extension for the invitation to come and sit at the table, and then see myself as a servant, not as the entertainment for the evening. So the gospel is always, that's what it means to live a cruciform life. You're always moving your life through the cross and asking who, and especially if you ask the question of, if you think about it, the people you hang out with are the ones that you've deemed worthy of your time. So if you don't hang out with someone, you're like, well, you're not worthy of my time, And that may not necessarily be a bad thing, because you might be in certain seasons of life, or I'm in a season where I have 4 sons, full-time wife, full-time job, full-time parents. And so I don't have as much time to contribute in many places. And that's okay to say there's seasons of my life. But most of us, in our darkest moments, we realize I don't want to spend time with this person. They're not worthy of my time. And if you think about the work of Jesus on the cross, well, no one is worthy of his sacrifice on the cross. No one is actually. And yet the Lord says, I'm going to meet them in their unworthiness. I'm going to meet them in their loneliness. I'm going to meet them in their brokenness. And I'm going to extend a table in the shape of a cross to bring them into the presence of the Lord, of the Father. So I think hospitality just confronts. And it also, I was thinking about this the other day in our home, and we don't have a huge home by any stretch of the imagination, but you do have to go upstairs to get in our house. And I thought about, well, what if we wanted to invite someone who's in a wheelchair or someone who is in a walker? We would have to find a way to get them in the house. And that's part of hospitality. Part of hospitality is saying, I need to think about who is coming and create, kind of like what you said before, and create the environment where I'm not just accommodating their needs, I'm actually integrating them into, so, hey, I'm going to build a ramp. We're going to have the meal outside to make it easier, not in our 4-degree weather, but in the summer. So part of hospitality is thinking through, how do I integrate this person into what I'm doing, not just accommodate them into something. So think about things like when you're being hospitable, things like if someone has dietary restrictions, instead of just everyone else is getting this beautiful meal and this person is gluten-free, like, well, here's some cardboard for you. But thinking through, how do I accommodate this person? So, hey, we're all going to actually have a really delicious gluten-free, if there is such a thing, meal. And we're trying to say, like, hey, because otherwise you just create these, you can have the tendency to say you're invited to the table, but that plate, like we're distancing ourselves even by this meal. So how can you try to find ways to say we're all going to contribute and share in this together? That's part of hospitality. Part of hospitality is taking the initiative to think through the needs of others and inviting them into that space, and then not making them feel like the odd person out, but inviting them into, excluded, but inviting them into, okay, we're going to all figure out how to do this together. And that's part of hospitality. And then as you've been in these environments, food just brings out so much. I think the difference we have to do as Christians is go beyond surface level conversations. When you read Acts 2 and it talks about the church gathered, they broke bread, they prayed, they fellowshiped, they sat under the teaching of scriptures. And what does it say? It says the awe and wonder of God was among them. Yeah. But what's important is 3 times in those verses, it talks about food. So there's something about food and gathering, talking about what the Lord is teaching you, talking about the signs and wonders that you're seeing, where you begin to see the awe and wonder of God. So again, if you just sit and you're having meals and it's, how was your day? And how is this? Then I think that's just kind of baseline friendship, entertainment, but it's deeper questions. It's learning how to ask questions, not solve people's problems, but sit in the grief and the joy of people's lives. And it just takes time. It takes initiative. So if you want to live a hospitable life, step 1 is you have to implement it. You have to put on your schedule Sunday evenings. Every Sunday evening, we do a table meal. We invite these people. Then step 2, you have to confront like the fear inside of you, and there's all types of fears, but confront the fear and then start extending invitations to people to come over. And then you want to actually take the initiative to ask really good questions and listen to people's answers. And then step 4, I would say, in living a hospitable life is investing in the resources and investing in relationships. So Americans spend, you will not believe this, Americans spend yearly upwards of $6.6 billion on kitchen appliances and cooking goods. What? $6.6 billion. So what if you could start looking at those as resources for hospitality? Hey, I want to invest in a pizza maker. I want to invest in a barbecue grill. I want to invest in a smoker. I want to invest in good plates because I want to see it as a resource for me to bless other people in my home and then invest in those relationships. So I think you look at it, if you look at that, sort of what I just walked through, that is the gospel. God implements his plan to enter in the human story. Jesus is willing to confront fear. He's willing to confront prejudice. He's willing to confront all these barriers that we keep among ourselves. He willingly confronts that, extends the invitation of the gospel, takes the initiative to make the sacrifice, and then continues to invest in the resources of the church and the relationships he has with us through his Holy Spirit. So you see the gospel like played out in just doing this. But I would go back to, if you don't put on a schedule, it's not going to happen. And I would say you need a schedule for when the church is coming over. You invite the church, because that's confession and sharing stories of the Lord. But you also need times where you invite your neighbor, non-believers, to come and engage in the presence of the Holy Spirit and to be drawn into the love of Christ. So you need both, and you can do both. It's not easy, but you can do both.
Yeah, I think I was just reflecting the other day on the discipline of listening. And I think that as you brought that up, I just was like thinking about that, of how important it is not just to ask a good question, but to listen to people as they're responding. And I think hospitality is so driven by that relational equity that you're building, right? And so as we were talking, I was thinking about, do you have some like really standout stories as you're talking about confronting fear, right? I think sometimes people are like, that's a really beautiful thing to say, but like, how do you practically do that, right? And so do you have any stories of where you and Hannah and your kids have invited like people who maybe it was a little uncomfortable at first and you weren't sure how it was going to go? Like, could you share a story of that in your own experience?
So our home, I think we counted, we've had 33 people live with us. Yeah. And some of them were, well put together, working professionals who could, for the most part, take care of themselves, And so we had no kind of worry about these people. Like, they were great. And we've had other people that have had significant issues in life, addictions, that's significant, and there's a worry about that. And so we've had to create wisdom around how we operate. So if a young man is staying with us who's coming out of rehab and he's in addiction, then we have certain boundaries of, hey, if I'm not home, you're not home. Yeah. So if I'm leaving at 4 a.m., you're leaving at 4 a.m. And there's just wisdom around that. So we want to confront that fear, because the fear says, no, we don't want this around our kids. We don't want this around anybody. So you want to be wise about who you invite in your home and how you do it. So for example, I do work with a lot of men who might be coming out of prison for certain types of offenses. who don't know where I live, because it would be unloving to my kids to bring them into that environment. But I'll meet them for coffee. I'll meet them for lunch. I'll meet them at Planet Fitness, things like that. I mean, we don't go in Planet Fitness. We talk in the parking lot. Yeah. So you want to be wise. You want to be wise, not fearful. So fear would say, no, don't come near my house. And like, but wisdom says, hey, for their benefit and for our benefit, and we're going to create this, boundary for us to be able to still engage in conversations. But then others, they've been invited into our house. And what's beautiful is the way that our kids now are not afraid of people. Our kids have seen me at 2 a.m. A guy's passed out on our lawn, and they've seen me like take the hose out and hose him down and drag him into the house. I'm like, Dad, what's going on? What's he doing? What's going? Can it help? Like, no, just stay inside. But they're not afraid. They're not afraid of people, because they've seen so many types of people come into our home, and they're not afraid of it. And that started, I think the most powerful story for me, though, is less about what Hannah and I've gone through, but what my parents specifically would bring men and women with leprosy into our home. And in Indian culture, that is a big no-no. Yeah. And they would bring them in our home, feed them, clothe them. My parents would give the clothes to my brother and I, my sister and I, and we would go and offer it to them. So we were touching people with leprosy. And what that taught me early on is not to be afraid of the poor. Yeah. So many people are afraid of poor people. It's almost like there's almost like this disease, like this thought in their mind: if I touch a poor person, I'll get poor, or I'll get whatever disease they have. And so that mentality early on was broken. But the way my parents said, we're going to be around poor people. And so one of the best things you can do is expose yourself to poverty and around poor people, and see the dignity in those who don't have what we have. And you begin to you can feel God confronting the fear you have in them. And it's all kinds of people that we've seen, like all kinds of people. Like the Lord is actively, on a Sunday morning, there's certain people that are talking to me, and they've been going through a hard time in life, and I can feel the Holy Spirit confronting me. I can feel the Holy Spirit confronting my prejudice against this person. And I could feel myself like, sometimes I'm like, don't look in their direction. Don't look in their direction. If they see you, and the Holy Spirit is like telling me, what if Jesus said that about you? Yeah. Like, don't look in his direction. Don't look in his direction. Don't look in his direction. And I'm like, but Lord, I got to go preach in 2 minutes, and I got to go do this, and I'm doing your work. And the Lord's like, yeah, but this is the work I'm more concerned about. So most of the time the Lord is preaching to me way before I get up on the platform and confronting my prejudice with certain types of people, and the Lord is breaking those down. And then Hannah and I have this conversation, and Hannah will say, like, this is the way the Lord works. Like, Hannah will say, exactly, I find myself trying to not be around that person, which we then look at each other and we're like, okay, that means they need to come over. Yeah. That means we need to extend dignity to this person, invite them into our home, and sit and dine with us, and to hear their story, and to love them, and to sacrifice. So the Lord is always confronting. But I could tell you stories for days of how God just, when we open up our home, how God has brought people. But the greatest thing that I think I see is the way in which it's making an effect on our children. Yeah. That these boys, now they see, what's funny is they see hospitality. Like, they ask me, like, Dad, when can we invite our friends over? Can you do a pizza night for me and my friends? Can we do this? And I want to invite so-and-so, so-and-so, so. So seeing them sort of like, oh, this isn't just like what my parents do. Yeah. Like, we can extend hospitality too. Yeah, they're integrated into it. So learning that, I think, is just watching our kids just come to life around the dinner table. Now they all eat like animals, but other than that, just the way the Lord's working. And there's so many beautiful stories of reconciliation. You know, the Rwanda Reconciliation Project, of how shared meals just do so much of people. But I'm telling you, there's something about sitting at a table with others that both confronts the fear, the prejudice, the hatred, the distance inside of you, and at the same time invites you into this really sacred moment for healing. And it's what Luke calls in Acts the mystery. Like, it's the mystery of God unfolding. And you're like, I don't even know how this is happening, but I am finding myself loving this person that I never would have anything to do with otherwise.
As I'm listening to your story, it reminds me of when I was growing up in the Philippines. a lot of people would invite my parents to their homes, right? And then they will put out the best meal that they don't even have for their children just to host. And it was just really inspiring of like hospitality is not just about us going above and beyond to host, but also to know how to receive hospitality. And so my dad showing up to houses that you would not normally visit, like people who have extended invitation, like it means so much when we show up to their home and receive what they are offering. And I think oftentimes so many people, when they're trying to invite somebody, like they want that connection, but also like they also want to be seen and known and celebrated through your presence. So I'm thinking of like Jesus's ministry too. Like, yes, he hosted like meals and invited, like sat with the tax collectors and sinners, but he must have been really invited to a lot of homes. And then like, how did that reflect hospitality in a sense of like showing up to somebody else's house that you would not normally go to? Or what does that look like in a receiving end that is still a part of hospitality, instead of having to constantly put up this like, I need to host, I need to prepare my house, I need to have a table,
That's a great question. Jesus had this remarkable ability to invite himself over to someone's house and then convince them to throw a party. Yeah, Zacchaeus, come down. We're having a party at your house right now. I think Jesus was fun. Yeah. I think if you're not invited to parties, you should really ask if you're a fun person. Like, I think he was fun, but I think Jesus was playful. I think there's a Trevin Wax has this amazing article about the four movements in the last 100 years of American Christianity. And he said, we're in the fourth movement of formation, of like spiritual formation, which has been around since the dawn of mankind, or since the Bible has been, this idea of transformation. But one thing I see a lot missing in this formation concept, which is interesting because Willard talks about this quite a bit, is playfulness. Yes, yeah. Hospitality is playfulness, being able to have fun. It's not this, like, let's be serious and have serious conversations all the time. You can be playful as you have conversations if you move from entertainment to hosting. Yeah. We're here to be with each other, and it can be fun. And so I think Jesus was playful, but I also think people were drawn to someone who was so deeply compassionate, who was so deeply convicted and unwavering on what's true, and who had the ability to listen and ask questions. Jesus is asked 183 questions. He answers 3. He asks over 300 questions that we know of. Yeah. So the ability to ask questions. So I think that's a goal. One of your goals should be, how can I be the kind of person that's invited over? Because I'm playful. I will, like, Gloria, we're having a party at your house. Yeah. When are you doing it? So I think part of that's just personality, temperament, but having the kind of posture of, man, this person really pulls the best out of people, sees the best in people, asks profound questions, listens really thoughtfully, gives great answers when they're asked something. So being that kind of hosting, here's my theory though, and I've seen this play in my real life. So whenever I go back to visit India, my parents, my parents led a large ministry, and so we were little kids, and all these people just loved us because of my parents. So when I go back to this day, I go back to India, and many of the people we interact with are very poor. I mean, very poor, live in huts, live in shacks. Yeah. But when they see me show up, they will meet me. They will take off work for the day to come and meet me. And they'll say, please come to our house, come to our house, come to our house. And because they think I'm American, I don't drink pop, but they will buy. I'm not joking. People who cannot afford food, their lights, are buying 2-3 liters of Coca-Cola and Fanta. And they expect me to drink all of this. Like, well, you're American. Like, you would love this. And what I realized in this moment is I heard a theologian say this once. He says, true poverty is the inability to be hospitable. Oof. Where you don't have a place, you don't have a table, you don't have a home, you don't have anything to invite someone over to. Yeah. And I think when they love me so much that they're willing to go and buy something. And so I'm always trying to find a way to pay for all of it. 'Cause I'm like, but it's such beauty in that the honor and like they're trying to dignify me.
Right.
And I think that Jesus was invited to people's homes because people realized how much Jesus saw them.
Yeah.
And they, no matter how poor they were going to find a way to have him over, to be able to sit at the table with them. True poverty is looking at your life and saying, I can't be hospitable. And it could be a financial reason, it could be a social reason, it could be a fear, it could be something. But to be the kind of person that says, I'm going to make a space in my home, and to help other people say, hey, you have a small apartment. We could do something here. To teach them that poverty is not distant. I remember me and Hannah had this tiny little apartment. I mean, it was so people would come over and they would sponsor us for $30 a month. And there was no room for a table. Like there was no room for a normal sized human table. So we built, and by we, I mean, I got this guy Cowboy Bill to build it for me. It was a 2 foot by 2.5 foot table.
Oh my gosh, that's tiny.
It was so small. I went to Home Depot, bought this wood. I tried to make it myself. My friend Bill came over. He's like, what are you doing? Let me build this for you. And we had this little table. Hannah's pictures of it. And we put it into our kitchen because there was no dining room. Put it into our kitchen. And we would cram people around this table. And we would all just be eating together or taking turns to sit down. But we wanted to live the kind of life that said nothing is going to hinder us from having people come over. Nothing. And I think so many people in Denver, 40% of people in Denver's the third loneliest city in America. Yeah. 5th fastest growing, third loneliest. 40% of Denverites live single. And so there's this sort of spiritual poverty that they're in that's keeping them isolated, loneliness. And is it Mother Teresa who said, loneliness is the leprosy of the modern world?
Yeah.
So you're looking at their life and like, well, I don't have, because our minds think to the entertainment industry of hospitality these days, where hospitality is a big business. Home renovation is an idol in America now. So we think through like, oh, I don't have a massive table, and I don't have this beautiful chandelier, and I don't have fresh china, and I don't have, Wagyu beef to offer these people. Therefore, I can't do it. So we live in this sort of spiritual isolation, which turns into physical isolation, which turns into spiritual poverty. And so we keep people at a distance. Jesus had a way of inviting himself into people's homes to dignify them with his presence because they wanted to dignify him. And that's how the mystery of God works. When you invite God in because you want to honor God, it turns out he actually honors you. He actually blesses you. And so wanting to live that life, I'm telling you, if Christians in our city and Christians in our church just put in one practice and said, once a week, I'm going to invite the church to my home to break bread, to pray, to share a meal. And then once a week or once every other week, I'm going to invite non-believers into my home with a rhythm. I'm telling you, you'd see a revival happen in our city. And it's historical. Dinah Butler Bass would say the church exploded not because of martyrdom, but because of hospitality. And that's, the radical hospitality from bringing in orphans and widows and children who are dying, taking care of the sick, but basic hospitality, open your home for a meal. If we did that, we would see incredible revival in our city.
Well, I feel like that is a great way to end this conversation. Nirup, thank you for all your wisdom in this and for continuing to lead our community in hospitality. I think it's really important that not just that congregants are living this way, but that leadership lives this way. So thank you for leading the way on behalf of all of us. And so thank you for tuning in for the Made Live podcast. We will be continuing our conversation on hospitality with a variety of different topics. And so we hope that you continue to tune in each week. But thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.